Welcome to everyone. I'm Vivian Altman. I'm the president of the Hunter College High School Alumni Association. I see so many familiar faces and names and fellow board members. And so I'd like to, first of all, thank Daisy for joining us and allowing us to enjoy this time with her book and to have this conversation. I saw a little bit online, a little dialogue between you and Kyla, and so that was fun. But thank you, Daisy, and thank you also to Kyla for your time this evening to share, and also would like to thank you, Daisy, for the gift cards that you provided to the students. And both of you really for your continued support, not only for the school and the students, but also for the AA. And thank you to everyone who's joined us this evening and is participating. So with that, I'm going to bounce it back to Lorna to get the evening underway.
Thanks, Vivian. Great to see everyone. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Daisy, Kyla, thank you for allowing us into this, allowing us this opportunity to talk about your fabulous book. I'm still letting people in, so multitasking here. So I have the pleasure of introducing both Daisy and Kyla. Daisy Alprin Florin attended Dartmouth College and received graduate degrees from Columbia University and Bank Street Graduate School of Education. She's a recipient of the 2016 Catherine Gerfine Writing Fellowship at Sarah Lawrence College and was a 2019-2020 fellow in the Bookends Novel Revision Fellowship, where she worked with founding director Susan Scarf Merrill, a native New Yorker. Florin lives in Connecticut with her family. Daisy, this book, amazing. Admittedly, I haven't gotten all the way through, but I've started skimming, so I'm super excited to hear more about it.
Yeah.
And now I want to introduce her partner in crime. Kyla Cooperstein Torres. So I've had the opportunity, Elle, Brian, and I've had the opportunity to work with these two wonderful women to get this event together. And it has been a joy. And Kyla, I had the opportunity to meet in person in May when I was in San Francisco at the San Francisco alum event. So we are, I'm super excited to be collaborating with her again and looking forward to other collaborations. And a little bit about Kyla. She is a writer, educator, and New York City native. Her work has appeared in the Amsterdam News, Forward, is that Lilith, Literary Mama, as well as the anthology, The Beijing of America. Sorry, I have a little screen. She was the managing editor of the national magazine, award-winning magazine, Stranger's Guide, and the director of admissions at the Hunter College campus schools from 2009 to 2016. She holds a BA in American Culture from Vassar and a master's in education from Harvard Graduate School of Education. She lives in Oakland with her husband and son. And ladies and gentlemen, with that, I have the pleasure to introduce you and let the evening begin with Daisy and Kyla.
Thank you, Lorna. And thank you, Elle, for all your help, Elle Bryant. And Kyla, thank you. I'm thrilled to just get to talk to Kyla for a while, and you guys can just hang out while we chat. I'm going to start by reading a very short section from the book. Oops, look what I did. I didn't mark the right page. Okay. So I'm going to read, I put a bookmark in, and what did I do with my page? Okay. Here it is. Okay, so this is from sort of the middle of the book. The main character is Isabel. And she, during the course of the book, is a senior in college. But she is reflecting back to the summer before her freshman year when her mother died died before she left for college. And this is just a flashback from that time. The only two things you need to know is that she calls her dad Abe, and he owns an appetizing store. And I will let that just like linger with all of you New Yorkers. I'm going to assume you know what it is, but if not, you can ask me later. We'll talk about it. I walked into the living room and remembered the summer she died, right before I left for Wilder. When it was all over, Abe stayed in his room, coming out only to get food from the kitchen, where a parade of women left a continuously replenished supply. Manny handled everything at the store, and I was alone and rudderless. A few of my high school friends were still around, but no one knew what to say to me, and I didn't want to talk to them either. The only person I wanted to talk to was Abe. Whenever I heard him come out of his bedroom, I would place myself in his path. Talk to me, I wanted to say, but never did. When he finally emerged after 8 days, he bagged up my mother's things, and when he was done, he put on his apron and went back to work. A few days before I was scheduled to leave for school, I found him in the living room reading the newspaper. My mother had been dead 3 weeks, and we were wobbly, like a table missing a leg. I practically ran into the room, sat down on the coffee table, our knees only inches apart. I was so close, I could have reached out and touched him. Maybe I shouldn't go, I said. What are you talking about? To Wilder. Maybe I shouldn't go. Of course you should go. Don't be ridiculous. I could take a year off. Go next year. No, he said. You are not going to put your life on hold. There are other schools, less expensive ones. Maybe I shouldn't be so far away. He lowered the newspaper. Isabel, you've suffered a terrible loss. I wish I could change that. I can't. But I can tell you this. Go, live your life, get away from all this. Believe me, you won't miss it. What if I don't like the people, I said. People are people. And what would be so bad about meeting different kinds? We drove up to Wilder at the end of the month, the car so full of stuff we couldn't see out the back. I cried the whole way. Everything I'd hated about New York suddenly wrapped in a patina of loveliness. The subway tunnels that smelled like piss, the roaches that skittered across the sidewalk in the dark, even Rosen's. I sniffed my nails, hair, and skin, searching for the smell of locks and brine, the one I'd always tried to wash away. When we pulled off the interstate, Wilder appeared before us, rising up out of nowhere like a fairy village or a mirage. We parked in front of my dorm, carried in boxes, hung posters, made the bed. Then I waved goodbye to my father and began again, just like he told me to, forgetting what I'd left behind, which was everything and nothing.
Thank you, Daisy, for that opening. You know, it's quite moving to listen to you read that passage when I'm looking at your actual father on the screen as well, and your squares are near each other. So really, thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. It's not my Abe is not my father, but
no, Abe is not your actual father, and is not fictionalized in this book.
I didn't grow up in an appetizing store, but yeah.
I think though that's a very important thing to start off with, right? I know that we've talked about when you've been on book tour that a lot of people, their first thing is like, how autobiographical is this book? Is this you? Did this happen to you? You know, what is this book really about? Like, I know, and I think we can let people here know, this is not an autobiographical book. This isn't your story. But what do you really believe? Like, what motivated you? What is this book about? What did you want to let people know?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, if you know the broad outlines of my life, which I think some people here do know, there is like an autobiographical component to a young woman leaving New York and going to college in New Hampshire, which is exactly what I did. And the sort of idea for the novel grew out of a series of essays I wrote, I don't know, in the mid last decade or whatever, the mid 2010s. I wrote a series of essays, which I didn't set out to write a series. It wasn't like I'm going to write a series of essays that take place in my college years. But I just did, because I started out writing personal essays, and a lot of the stories that I started to tell, the ones that kind of rose to the surface right away, were ones from my college years. I don't know why. I think that is a time that is like a very emotionally intense time, a fraught time. A lot of development happens at that time. So I was kind of writing about relationships I'd had and just what it felt like to go to a school like Dartmouth, coming from a school like Hunter, coming from like the kind of background that I came from, and really like just grappling with that. Like, what did I not know about the world when I went to Dartmouth? What did I learn about the world while I was there? And then as I was writing in 2015, 2016, 2017, like what, there were things happening in our culture that for me kind of brought back a lot of that conflict that I felt like I was dealing with back in the 90s. So after I finished writing this series of essays, I wasn't really finished with the story. I wanted to write more. I wanted to stay in that time. I wanted to have a bigger runway, not just write like a longer piece, but also just like write about things that hadn't happened to me, kind of use fiction to say things that I couldn't in essay.
It's interesting as you're talking about going through, the 20 teens and what's emerging. Something we've talked about before about this book is that it really explores the complexity of girls with feelings, right? The name of your newsletter, like the complexity of what it means to be a young woman growing into herself, being launched out into the world. And then as you're writing it, right, the rise of Me Too becoming a really important force in the culture at large. And I wonder, if we can just talk a little bit about what that allows for young women today that maybe wasn't allowed to us as young women, going into the kinds of institutions like, patriarchal, old, white, Dartmouth, New Hampshire, Ivy League. So just talk to me a little bit about how you feel, the differences in the context while you were writing about another time in young women's development.
Yeah, I mean, that was a big thing. So I started writing the novel, or scenes that would become the novel, in 2015. So that was before Trump, before Me Too. I was already kind of like unpacking things that I had observed, things that I just felt like, now that I was in my 40s, how did I feel about my 20s? How did it feel to sort of unpack, like, even being able to start writing, which I didn't really do until my late 30s, early 40s, I had to shed just like a lot of stuff that I was holding on to for a long time that had a lot to do, with like being like a good girl and, wanting to like do all the right things. And I had to kind of shed all of that just so I could really start to like talk about, like start to tell the truth about things in my life or things that I had just observed. Because the book is set in 1998, and it's about this character, Isabel Rosen, who's in her final semester of college. It's set in 1998 because it's loosely against the backdrop of the Clinton-Lewinsky scandal, which is something that we were starting to unpack culturally. In 2014 is when Monica Lewinsky kind of reemerged from her exile. And I think a lot of people, myself included, were like just sort of re-examining what we as a society had done to her. And I think I felt in a way complicit in that, which we can talk about. So anyway, so at the beginning of this final semester of college, two things happen to her. One is she has what I call a non-consensual sexual encounter with someone she thought was a friend. And that kind of shakes the foundation of the world she thinks she's built at Wilder, which has been fragile to begin with. And then she proceeds to have a love affair, a consensual love affair, with a married writing professor. So the book does sort of grapple with ideas of like consent and power dynamics between men and women. So Me Too definitely pushed on the novel, like as I was writing, everything that was happening in the culture was informing my work every day. And I sometimes wonder if I would have finished the book if these things hadn't happened. Like I felt this urgency to keep writing, like the world was talking to my book, and like every day I was sort of absorbing like something new. Yeah, so I think my book like kind of met the moment. I was working on it at the right time for me.
It's interesting you talk about sort of those bookends, Monica Lewinsky, Me Too. And one of the big questions as I read the book that came up a lot was this question of young women's agency, right? What happens when Isabel is in bed with her supposed friend and they have this murky, uncomfortable sexual encounter? What happens when she goes back to her friends and it's immediately contextualized as a thing, right, as a rape by one of her friends, and becomes a big event on campus? What happens? I'm looking here at page 82, the moment where Connolly, the professor that she has the affair with, just says, Isabel, wait up a second, like the small touch of a powerful professor and a small man. And what happens from that first encounter where she feels chosen and special. And yet, you were watching these young women, Isabel and her friends in this last semester of college trying to figure out and make choices. And in the end, there could be a spoiler. In the end, she makes a really big choice. And so if you can just talk to me a little bit about what it was like to explore there's just like the landscape of power that young women feel they have or feel is elusive. What were some of the motivating things maybe from your own experience that you put into Isabel, or things that you observed in other friends, or even, your daughter's, peers and the kids that you've taught over the years? What are some of those like important themes for you about young women in agency?
Yeah. Great question. I think that just like from a craft standpoint, when I started to write the book, and I think this is common with new writers, and even now I'm working on a second book now, and it's still, I see it in my like sort of embryonic work now, is that characters are very passive. And that was in a long way through the draft. Isabel was just very passive, was watching things happen. Things were sort of happening around her, and she wasn't really like a player in her own life. And over time, I had to sort of adjust that and make her, because that's very boring. That's not very interesting. So in a way, it was like a craft decision to sort of give her more agency, because that just makes novels more interesting. But also, also I was trying to say something. I mean, any novel, any story really has to chart change. There has to be a journey. The character has to change from beginning to end. So I also kind of wanted to show that. But I think that, I think that I did want to say something about what can happen to women. And I guess this can happen to men too. I don't know. I'm not like going to talk about men right now. They can have write their own book, but I think something can happen to women where you can meet up with bad mentors. And I think that something that I felt, and I don't know if this is something that other women felt, I suspect that it is a lot of desire for affirmation and approval. And often that would come from men, right? Because we live in patriarchy. Academia is a patriarchal institution. And at least in the 90s, a lot of the doors that you had to walk through were often, being opened by men, or that was my experience. And I think that sometimes when that approval shines on you, or that affirmation shines on you, when you're in this kind of vulnerable and murky state of development, that can often feel a little bit like love. And I think a lot of women have experiences like that. So I kind of wanted to talk about that. And then what would happen if you actually like made the choice to have the love affair. When the door closed, you kept it closed, right? You didn't try and get out of that room. So in that way, you know, she is seeking something in this affair. She does get something out of this affair. You know, and so it's she's not a powerless figure. I wasn't interested really in having, you know, Connolly be a villain and Isabel be a victim, and that's how the story goes, because I think life is much more, you know, interesting and nuanced like that. And that's also, I think, where women can fall a little bit into shame, into like self-blame and shame. And that's something I've also felt, observed. It's just like something I, you know, kind of know in my bones.
I'm going to jump in right there for a second, because what's really interesting, and I don't have the page in front of me, but at the end, once Isabel has made her courageous decision, Connolly almost gives her that gift, right? And I don't know if you can put your finger on it, but he's like, oh, it's something like, you girls are all running around here and you know you have power. And there's a way in which, you know, she gets herself reflected back to her through the eyes of the well, I won't give anything away, but a man who's it's no longer clear like where power lies, but power is profoundly at the end of the novel. And that, you know, I remember reading it and thinking like, oh, right. You know, we were young and didn't know how to drive the car, but in fact, we decided the speed limit, we chose the exits, and we don't even notice sometimes. I think young women, and even women who are further along in their careers, don't notice how, though we are not the people in charge, often the choices we make shift the plates and change the power dynamic, whether, you know, we think that we're able to do that or not. And often the fact, right? Once the dust has settled, we're like, oh, I really had a big impact there. I didn't understand what I was doing.
Yeah, really well said, I think. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely about like power shifting places, right? So at the beginning of the book, she perceives herself as powerless and he has the power, but he is seeing something in her. He is actually on the downward slope, and he sees something in her that is powerful and kind of attaches himself to her just as at the time that power shifting places. And that's also interesting, just in a novel, to have power shift places.
But also that there's a way, it's an interesting sort of overtone that in some ways Isabel is reviving Connolly in a way that, you know, she's had this experience of losing her mother, that there's been a lot of sort of heaviness and darkness, and there's a way that there's heaviness and darkness in this relationship too, but she's actually a wellspring for him.
Yes.
So
because we see that. I see that sometimes if you are ever out and you see, you know, some older guy with some young girl, you see it so clearly. It's so clear to us now, right? Maybe
the buxom blonde and the red convertible and the older man, you know, like it's really, there's and yet, right, when you're the buxom blonde, when you're the young woman, you don't necessarily see what power you have. Or maybe, you know, in popular culture, I think we see more of that, right? Like that young woman sort of inhabiting her, you know, what do they call it, boss girl or bad lady boss, or, you know, that spirit and wielding it more. So, you know, I mean, obviously young women today are getting a very different message before they step onto a Dartmouth master's campus than we got. But I want to sort of hold our Hunter experience for the end, but I think that we've talked so much about this, about how we went, and, you know, Vassar used to be a women's school, but still I felt that, you know, Ivy League heaviness. That at Hunter, and I'm glad we have someone from the math department here, we talked a lot about never feeling like girls wouldn't, that we didn't have room. And perhaps people from, you know, when we get to Q&A, some people from other years can have some things to say, but even though boys were there in our day, that, I mean, a very formative thing for me was when there was the research going on about BC calculus, right? Putting girls and boys into two different sections and seeing how they fared. There was co-ed single sex for both grades. So there was never an idea that girls couldn't run things. I didn't internalize that. So talk to me a little bit about sort of your Hunter to Dartmouth transition and how that informs some of the thinking that Isabel and the experiences Isabel goes through in the book.
Yeah, I mean, so Kyle and I talked about this, and I'm going to like say something that like, I'm very curious to see how other people feel, but I really did not feel diminished in any way at Hunter by being a girl. Like it was not.
Throw some comments in the chat about this so that we can hear a lot of voices. Like,
I did not feel that it was a patriarchal institution in any way. I felt like the girls were kind of in charge. Like I definitely felt, I never felt less than. And then I made this really interesting decision, and a very like deliberate decision, to go to a college like Dartmouth, which was like less than 20 years into the coeducational project, that was like frat parties and whatever. I mean, just like every Animal House came out of Dartmouth, like, and I was like, no, that's where I want to go. So you psychoanalysts in the audience can like have a field day with that one. I don't know what. And it was a massive shift. Like,
Daisy, I'm going to interrupt you. Oh my God, I was going to say Hunter always had a female leader, but Anthony Miserandino is here on the Zoom call, who took over for our last few years of high schools.
oh my God. Oh my gosh. I'm like not looking at every face right now, but yeah. Okay. So
I was like,
I felt just very empowered at Hunter in a way that I did not feel at Dartmouth. So I think so that was another thing, because you and I have talked about like, why did I give Isabel this background of being like having grown up in this appetizing store? Because Kyla, I think you were like, that wasn't your background, right? You know, but I wanted to give her this, give her this kind of sort of strange background, like very secularly Jewish background, and then go to a place like Wilder and just be like completely misunderstood. And I didn't have that specific background, but I feel like in other ways I was completely misunderstood when I went to college, because Hunter was like not like any other place. You know, I didn't know how to describe it. It wasn't like, oh, the kids who went to Trinity, like, oh, do you guys know each other? And I was like, no, we've like never seen each other before, and I didn't grow up in like a big suburban high school. So it was just a very strange place. So maybe this appetizing store was kind of a stand-in for that. I don't know. I just thought about that for the first time.
This moment in history in the last week is a pretty fraught time for Jewish identity, wherever you stand on a political spectrum or your relationship to Israel and Palestine. But I just want to ask you a little bit about that, about Isabel's Jewish identity, about her secularism, and choosing something as particular as an appetizing store, right? Which, if you're not from New York and you're not Jewish, you probably don't even know what that is. And Isabel has to explain it, right, to people like, no. But talk to me a little bit about, the sort of the locus of Isabel as a Jew and your own experience, and why, like, what role that plays and why that's important.
Yeah. And Kyla and I have talked so much about like our experience as Jews or half Jews or whatever we were. And it's so interesting to overlap in that way, because, the book actually like has a lot of Jewish representation in it. So there's Isabel, who's from New York, who's grown up in this store with like a very, like culturally Jewish background.
Also,
but
both
not religious.
Her mother, and not having like that, Upper West Side or
right.
socialist or any of the sort of tropes that we know about Judaism as a typical New Yorker, right? With her mother as an artist and her father as an abbot. Like, it's an unusual Jewish identity to bring to New Hampshire,
which I wanted to sort of represent, right? And then she gets to Wilder and she has her friend Deborah, who's like from Scarsdale, and maybe had a more, like going to Hillel House and all of that, which feels completely foreign to Isabel. And then she has this experience at the beginning of the book with her friend. He's actually Israeli. And, that's also something, he's sort of identifying with her like, well, Israel is like for you, and I fought in the army and I'm fighting for you. And she doesn't feel that it like doesn't mean anything to her. So a friend of mine actually pointed out, you know, she was like, oh, you didn't make him like the lacrosse playing, you know, frat guy. You know, I actually gave him this kind of identity, and I don't know why I did that, but it was like he was sort of an outsider too in these ways. He's kind of unliked, not because he's Israeli, just because he's like kind of an ass, and you know, he's sort of unliked, and so that's the person. So I'm interested in like grayness and nuance, and I wanted to complicate him also, even though I don't want you to necessarily like him. I don't think people really like him, but you might feel a thing, because that just problematizes the whole question of what happened between them and the way that he's treated. You know, she's not sure how to feel about that. And I wanted to capture something about what it felt like for me to come to college, and I feel like a New Yorker in these weird ways, but also just feel kind of misunderstood, which sounds weird, I guess. Like she's an outsider in a way that I felt like an outsider, and yet I had all these things that made me an insider. So it seems crazy to even present myself as any kind of outsider. But I actually think we're all outsiders when we go to college, because, you know, you're sort of forcing together this community. And even the people, you know, because over the years I've talked to people who I'm like, oh, you were like an insider, like you were like, you know, went to Exeter and you did all the things. And then the people will be like, no, but like my dad was bipolar and I had, you know, like all, you know, everyone has a thing, you know. So, and that's kind of what you learn as you go through life, right? Everyone has a thing.
But also, I think that's the real power of this novel. You know, I think it's really, you know, look, you're my friend, I dig you, but when I read it, it really was extraordinary, because I think it really delves into that kind of nuance, you know. And I think that that idea of dropping into the specificity of a character and dropping into the specificity of each person's experience as they come to a place like college, right? It's a completely artificial environment. You take a, you know, X thousand 18 to 22-year-olds, throw them in a hopper, have them live together, pour alcohol on it, and then like achievement and the, you know, the carrot of a job or a life at the end. I mean, it's absurd that anyone even gets through that. So when you drop into the specificity of each of the characters in this ecosystem, which I think you do really, really well in the book, that it allows you to understand, you know, what is the nature of, what is an outsider, right? There's almost no one in the book who is an insider, right? There are very few people. There's a couple characters, but even those people, you see the power shifting underneath them in a way that like the center kind of doesn't hold, even though the institution does.
The institution, right? Because that's the thing. That's the thing that you have to remember. So I don't know about like other, you know, people of our generation, but, you know, the 90s were like a time where I wanted to sort of recapture that moment of like vigilante feminist justice, which like we were definitely trying on at Dartmouth. Some of the things that I talk about like are actual things that happen. You know, we'd have these like actions and stuff. But it was because we didn't
back the nights, right? Like
yeah,
the
like to take
visuals,
back
right?
the nights and things like that. And but it's because we didn't feel like we could be heard by the institution. And it's not that the institution didn't want to hear us, but institutions change so slowly. And so her friend Deborah, who's kind of this like 90s riot girl, you know, take back the night, you know, feminist vigilante activist, she's kind of bangs her head against the wall. She's banging her head against the wall of this institution that will ultimately change, but it won't change for her. It won't change on her, you know, on her timeline.
And also who possesses a great deal of privilege, right? So how, no matter how deep out into the ugly water she goes, she'll have an internship because her mommy will see to it, right? And that there's that, I think that also is a thing, a kind of Hunter transition, right? So few of us were those kids at Hunter who were just relying on the parents' contacts or the, you'll get folded into the wherever. We know someone who will give you a job. We weren't the independent school kids, right? We weren't the kids who went to school. We were on Madison and Park, but not that Madison and Park at our school.
And we needed the institution, right? Like we wanted to wrap ourselves in the the fold of that institution because we believed it could give us something that we didn't have. And then when you are up against, socializing with people who are like, fuck this place, or like burn it to the ground, or like, wait, but I don't want to burn it to the ground. Like I just got here,
Right, because you can buy it back at the
Yeah.
end. Like I can't necessarily do that.
Yeah.
Daisy, I wanna make sure we have time to open up for questions, but I just wanna, as someone who is, we're similar ages, I too am coming into publishing more in my late 40s. And I wanted just you to talk a little bit about your journey as a writer. I know you were an educator. So many of us who come out of Hunter, I guess we had such an extraordinary educational experience, but we all go on to work in education in some way or other. But
Yeah.
talk to me about your arc as a writer and what it feels like, to publish your first novel, if you don't mind, at 49. I mean, we all know each other's years here, right? So
Yeah. There's
what's that like?
I mean, it's fantastic. I'm super, super happy. I think that, I was at a literary festival this weekend and a lot of people were asked like, oh, when did you know you're going to be a writer? When did you decide to be a writer? And most people are like, oh, when I was 7, I wrote my first novel, or I was like writing plays for kids to act out at the bus stop. And I actually wasn't doing any of that stuff. I did not really do that. And so I think like for most of my life, I thought, like the door was kind of closed, like, oh, I watched a lot of TV. I didn't like, I wasn't with my nose buried in a book for my entire childhood. I was like doing stuff, maybe like appearing.
You were right. And you were
Yeah,
a bit
I
of
was like doing a lot of theater, which I think you and I both were doing that. And I think that is connected to, storytelling and writing. A lot of people I know are like former actors or actresses who came to writing because we're interested in story. I went to college, I majored in history.
You're ahead of you. Thisbe Nissen is a big writer and was also a big theater person with us.
Yes. So I didn't major in English. I didn't like write for the literary magazine and all that stuff. So I think I kind of thought like that door was closed. And so but I always loved to write, and people would tell me I was a good writer. Like at Hunter, people would say like, I was a good writer. I could write a good essay. I could write a good term paper. And I think like growing up in New York, going to Hunter, I didn't think that was really anything special. Like I just felt like everyone could do that because most of the people that we knew could do that. So I don't know, it was only really later when I was home, I was like raising my 3 kids, living in like the suburbs. And I was just like, I was happy and I liked what I was doing, but I was like, oh my God, if I don't write and somehow try to be heard, I'll lose my mind. So I just started to do that probably in my late 30s, and then, workshops and publish essays here and there. And it's a process. And I feel now like looking back, I can see all the clues, I can see all the breadcrumbs. I just couldn't see them at the time. So this, I did work in book publishing. That was like one of my early jobs out of college. So it didn't feel foreign to me. Like I sort of understood it, like, oh, this is a thing that you can do and that can happen. And I just surrounded myself with really good and supportive people. No bad mentors anymore,
Daisy, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
I want to give folks a chance to ask questions because I know people must be burning with curiosity as well. If you can either do a hand raise, maybe, or just blurt it out.
Well, just to go back for a minute to a reference to math and women students. When I first got to Hunter, I looked at some of the data and I was startled by the fact that so few women students were going into BC calculus. And I did some analysis and I said to the math department, if we don't correct this, I'm going to report you. I'm going to go to the New York Times to say this is not acceptable. And that's where the study that you made reference to, Kyla, with Rena Subotnick emerged from that data that I produced back in 89 and 90 that showed those differences. So that's a little bit of a background I think is important here, that it is a process, and it was embarrassing, quite frankly. So I think we turned a corner in that regard. So I'm really pleased about that. And Sheila can maybe speak to some of that as well, but it was an important turning point in the curriculum.
Yeah, I can say right now you have a pretty good balance, male, female, in the pre-calculus and calculus classes. And the one place where the male dominance occurs is math team. But math team is for the kids who are up for that quick fire fast stuff, and it's not real math. I mean, it's I love it, but it's not the essence of math. And I'm thrilled that our classes are much more balanced now.
Well, it's also something competitive, right? For guys who aren't necessarily going to like win the race or play on the team or sink the basket. Like you can win on the math team.
Yeah, my son was in competitive math. And it was very male. I mean, all very male dominated. But like then see, like I would not have been interested in doing that at all. So is that because like I didn't feel like I had entree into that, or it was just like not, not my interest? But I did take calculus, not BC. I think there were, I don't remember, but yeah, I'm like so glad to be reminded of that, because I actually had forgotten that.
But I think also, we had, when you thought about who the legendary teachers were, there were as many women as men. There were as many women that you were like, whoa.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, there was Marinoff, but there was Morello. There was always another teacher. I remember there always being women in the classroom demanding of us.
And your reference to Anna Morello is a good one. I mean, I think there were plenty of women mentors out there available for students.
For sure.
Yeah, and she's a wonderful. She was a wonderful example. Yeah, and she was a pleasure to work with as a colleague. It's wonderful.
It was. Yeah.
Other questions for Daisy?
Yeah, or anyone. Yeah. I'm gonna mute you, Dad.
Yeah.
Oh no, I can't mute you.
Well, if other people have more questions, I certainly have more things I'd like to ask you always. I think about this issue of like mentorship, right? You just said no more bad mentors. And when I think about your arc, you're publishing more and publishing your first novel at a time where, as women, your kids are getting older. You see, the no fucks left to give that happens when you turn 45, 50 years old. And wondering about the difference between, Isabel is a writer, a young writer, and in workshops a lot, right? And in fact, that same scene that I mentioned is talking about the process and workshop of being torn down, right? People critiquing your work, and that on some level it stops the inspiration. And so if you could talk to me a little bit about what it was like to get into your groove at an older age, where perhaps other people's opinions were not as important, or talk to me about just what was that landscape for you.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I talk to a lot of young women now. Like I've had women reach out to me who are just graduating from Dartmouth. I've spoken to a few of them. Like I just graduated, I have this creative writing degree, and like, how do you make a life? And of course I have no advice for them whatsoever, but I'm kind of glad that I didn't do that I didn't do a creative writing degree or get my MFA in my 20s. I just think you can get so shut down. And what I describe in the book, I describe some workshop scenes, which are kind of damaging workshop scenes. And I was actually never really in a damaging workshop scene, in a damaging workshop, because I came to them later in my life. And honestly, when you start like writing in Fairfield County in your late 30s, and you're taking a 10 a.m. on a Thursday writing class, you're basically writing with like a bunch of other women. You know what I mean? So it's like, I was in
I
these.
always said, I was not taking another workshop with like white retiree women, because it was like such a, no offense to any white retiree
No
women.
offense. It's just like, for me, that was like not a space I wanted to re-enter. I didn't do that on purpose, but that was the space. And everyone I've kind of interacted with throughout this entire process, like my agent is a woman, my editor is a woman, like, publishing is just a very female dominated field.
Low paid.
It's low paid, right? So I mean, I felt very held throughout the process, but I think this idea of the workshop, which has been talked about by people smarter than I am, but it is like this, kind of like, it's a model that works for certain people and can just be really crushing. So one of the things that I have found, and Jill I've seen Jill at some of these events also, is this sort of model of writing called gateless writing, which has really worked for me, which is just it's you share what you've read and you're only told what is strong in the work. And the reason that works, I mean, that doesn't mean that you're never critiqued, you never go back and fix it, and you never revise, because you have to do all of that. Obviously, this book was like revised 1,000 times by a million different people, with their eyes on it. But in that, like, here's this little story that I wrote and I'm going to show it to you now. The last thing you need anyone to tell you at that moment is what's wrong with it, because you're pretty good at identifying what's wrong with your stuff. Like, that's kind of like what we do to our own self. So we don't really, and we're sort of taught this idea of like, well, if you tell me what I'm doing wrong, then I can fix it. But actually, when people are just telling you what you're doing wrong all the time, you're really not interested in fixing anything. I mean, anytime you've been like called into someone's office and they're like, let me give you a little feedback, it's like, you kind of just like really sort of crumble, or at least I did. So in that way, like, this model has really worked for me, and also made me realize that, like, because I'm a good student, a good Hunter student, it was like, well, I need to get like I can't write until I have all the degrees, until I've done all the things, and then I can go out and write. And through this process, I was like, oh, I actually already have a lot of stuff. Like, I already have it. It's just a matter of like chasing off that conditioning that tells me I can't do anything until it's really right. And here's a story that I'll just share because I think it just encapsulates this. I have a friend who I went to Dartmouth with, and her son is now a student at Dartmouth. And she's like, oh, he is joining a band. And I was like, oh, does he play? Like, I wasn't aware that he was like a musician. She's like, yeah, well, he like plays the guitar like a little bit. And I was like, well, there's some male confidence for you. Just like, I play the guitar a little bit, so I'm going to join a band. Whereas I would have been like, I have to like be really perfect because I was a singer. And sometimes he would be like, oh, hey, do you want to get up and like sing karaoke? And I was like, no, like, I can never get up and sing karaoke.
Rehearse, right?
I have to rehearse. Like, I couldn't be like loose and free with the whole thing, like, I just got so in my own head. So anyway, that I think was just, I feel like people can probably relate to that, of just like needing to do it like really, really well. And that can just really like keep you shut down for your whole life.
I think it's so important what you highlight there, because I think it's the same arc of dating when you're a young person, because you're looking for the one, right? Mm-hmm. The person I'm going to marry, the person I'm going to have children with, the person who's going to like complete me, the person who's going to have me settled in the world so I can go forward. In the same way that people are like, what's my career? How am I going to be successful? How do I make it? Right? The young women who are writing you from Dartmouth, I have the degree, now I'm get the thing, then I do the book of short stories, then I do the novel, then I have then I win the prize. But there's an arc that you're meant to follow. And I find I'm really glad you mentioned the gateless writing. I do something similar in this round robin class where you're, again, only allowed to give positive feedback. And it's so consonant with being an educator, right? You build kids up, you make sure that you're giving them enough encouragement, because when you get that feedback, you're like, oh, I can do this. Oh, this touched someone. This actually affected someone. And I think it's one of the most important What's beautiful about this book is it does that really effectively, more than just being a witty or successful or expertly or deftly written story. It's something that's really affecting at a deep level. And when I put out a few essays recently, mostly about my Jewish identity, about my son, and people stop me in the strangest places, at the Y or wherever it is, but that they have a very strong reaction because they saw themselves.
Yes.
Right. And I think as writers and as people, right, any kind of creative people, we're always thinking, did I do it well enough? Did I do a good job? Do I please? Did I do it right? Did I get it? When in fact, when you put yourself out there, when you put your work out there, what actually comes back to is people are like, that was the most deft metaphor I've ever read in my life. Or what a fabulous scene structure you had for the opening of the novel. They're like, oh my God, you spoke for me. Oh my God, Isabel's story is my story. Even if they're, Latina from Texas or just from some other experience, they can pick up this book. Good art does that. And when you take the pressure off to be perfect and you remember that that's the motivating, that's the end result if you do it well. I think really the more you can hold on to that, the more that you can just keep progressing and let it be fun without the pressure of the achievement.
Of being perfect or, I mean, I think I've had people reach out to me about the book or, so I had someone ask me, because there's sort of like a kind of a question that sort of bedevils people is like, was Isabel a victim or something? That's sort of like a theme throughout the book, like consent and was she sort of taken advantage of in these ways? And so this woman asked me, like, did you think she was a victim? And I sort of started to answer her, and then she was like, because I think, and then she just kind of went on with her thing. And I realized it actually didn't even matter at all what I said. I didn't have to have an answer for her. I didn't really have an answer for her. I was like, I wrote the whole book because I don't really have an answer for that. But it was really more important what she thought about it, right? Like I couldn't really control, her reaction to it. So yeah, I mean, I had someone, when the book was already in, not the finished hardcover, but there was it's like an ARC, like an advanced reader's copy, and a writer got the book to give me a blurb, and very nicely, I guess, was like, oh, I'd love to have like a phone call with you, and went through the book to sort of line edit me in these ways. And the book was, I was sort of mortified because it was the book was already like I couldn't make these line edits, and she really had spent so much time making these line edits for me and going over them with me on the phone. And I was sort of crumbling inside a little bit. And I got on the phone with another friend. I'm like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And she's like, just forget it. First of all, forget it because you can't do anything about it. But she's also like, that's not how people interact with the book. They're not line editing you when they're reading it. They're just in the work. They're in the experience, you might read a book and you love it, but maybe there was a chapter you didn't love or a line that didn't really sit right with you, but you just kind of keep going. So that's what the experience is. So anyway.
So it's a sort of two-part question. I want to know what's next for you. What's up with the new book? Are you writing more essays? What's happening? But also, where are the places in your life that you feel you're unfinished, that you don't know what the outcome is going to be, or where you're looking forward to adventure or something new? Your children again are moving into their next phases. Will you stay in the suburbs or come back to the city? What's what's the landscape ahead?
I don't know. Yeah, we're just just keep everybody moving. We're just keep everybody moving. I mean, I am working on a new book, and trying to stay in that place of it's a mess and that's what it is. And that's how it was. And this took a long time. So this will take a long time. And trying not to get sort of in my head about finishing something fast, because I don't work fast. I have to take a really long time to think about things. So, I'm thrilled that the book is out in the world. I feel like it's
very well.
I feel like it's done well. I've connected with a lot of people. And yeah, I mean, I have one son who's a junior in college, and then my daughter's a senior in high school, and then my son's a freshman in high school. So it's like all systems go all the time. We've been here in Connecticut for 13 years. I don't think we will necessarily stay like forever. I don't think I'm going to go back to New York, which is like weird. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. You know what? The one thing I'll just
Sorry,
say
Dad.
about growing up in New York is that I always felt like, well, there was nowhere else to go. Like there was this, I thought this was like a hilarious joke at one point. It was like, come to Westchester. I used to live in Westchester. I did live in Westchester. At one point when I was in New York and like an obnoxious teenager, someone was like driving through Mamaroneck and like pronounced it Mamaroneck. It was, and we just like laughed and laughed and laughed. Like, what is this place? Mamaroneck. Like, who would even think of such a place? You know, whatever. So it was like very myopic and all New York, New York, New York. And then of course, as you like leave, you're like, wow, there are like other nice places. Like I'm still in that place of discovery, like, wow, Providence, Rhode Island, it's awesome. And like people live here and they have like lives and you know, all of that. New Haven, I was just in New Haven this week. It's like, look at all these people in New Haven, you know, so the world is big. So that's what I've
yeah. I mean, I think as New Yorkers, especially, oh, Alex, you're in America.
I know. It's nice. It's like nice, you know? Yeah.
I never remember
My mom can't pronounce it.
Long Island. Where is Mamaroneck? I always get
Westchester.
I get Mamaroneck and Massapequa mixed up. I used to
Ronkonkoma.
in Ronkonkoma. I'd be like, oh yeah, out in Massapequa. It was my like dismissive.
Yeah, like whatever. I know. And you know what? Michael is here. Michael Bergman, who was my camp counselor. Okay. This is what you do when you write a book. It's like, am I dead? Is this my funeral? Or it's just like a Zoom event. But the theater thing, actually, I was a singer and I was so hard on myself. And then over a million years of watching American Idol or The Voice, I learned that, of course, the ones who are really fantastic are not the ones who are technically perfect. I would see those girls get up there because they were always girls with their beautiful voices and they looked beautiful and they were so nervous and so in their own heads. And it was the ones who were really just like, their voices were a little scratchy or, you know, maybe they were a little bit off key at point, but like that was what you really connected with. Yes.
People who are loving it, people who are all in.
Yeah. Who are doing something new and not perfect. So.
Anything else from our audience that they want to know? Give folks another chance to jump in. Or memories of Daisy or of me.
No. Memories of.
Can you give us a tiny little tidbit about what you're working on, or do you not want to say?
Oh, okay. I'll try because I haven't really. It's about a woman who lives in New York and she's married to a man who's been accused of committing a crime. So that's kind of what it is. And I'm trying to make like, I'm just trying to figure it out because I'm not like terribly interested in crime or like police or lawyers. So it's more, I'm trying to like figure out this way of like, what is like what I am able to understand is like when a bomb drops in your life, right? And all the scrambling that has to happen in lives that are already very full. So that's sort of what I'm trying to figure out.
And in some ways it's consonant with the themes, I think, even from this book.
Yeah, it is definitely. I have things, yeah, like you, Kyla, like have things you're obsessed with that you're probably just going to keep just
right. Everything is recycling those same questions over and over again, right? Where you've got what does it mean like to be confined to other people's definitions as a woman, right? What is it like where's the power? How are men's choices the things that, you know, like all of those things I think are in this book, and we're excited to revisit it. Working on anything shorter that we'll see sooner, or just is all your energy in this novel?
No, you know what? I wrote a bunch of essays like for when the book came out. I was like kind of doing that. And
And
I
there's
would
a
like
lot
to
of
write.
overlap in our essays these days, right? A lot of
I
like,
know. No, I mean, you're writing so many essays. It's so hard to write essays, I think, because you have to write them like sometimes with an outlet in mind or something, like, or I don't know. You're good at, I mean, I like writing essays. If I had a good idea, I would write one. I just don't have a good idea right now. Yeah.
well, the world is giving us lots to write about these days. So,
Oh, that's for sure. Oh
well,
my
Daisy, thank you so much.
Thank
I mean,
you,
we've burned up
Kyla.
a lot of hours recently, like preparing for this event and just talking and talking, but
I know.
wonderful to see everybody here tonight. And thank you
Thank
for
you all
supporting
for
the
coming.
AA, and thank you for coming out to hear Daisy talk about this amazing book. If you have not read it, please buy it and buy it for another person and read it. It's really a treat. And I think it also makes, this is a great gift for young people as well. I think this is a really great novel to read with young people. Lisa, I've told Amelia and other people to encourage the young folks who are still at the high school to read it, but it's just got a lot of important stuff for all of us to chew on.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. Yes, thank you. And thank you all for
I
coming.
think I bought two by accident, so I'll give one to my niece.
Oh,
Where's
thank
Carrie Fox?
you.
Turn your camera on, Carrie Fox. I didn't see you.
Yay.
There she is.
Oh, is she on the train? Oh, no, she's
Oh, on the bus.
Ann Meter? Why can't we see?
Yeah, Anne, where are
Meter?
you? I was gonna say we might have to do a little hey.
Yeah, look at Anne. Oh my God.
Exactly the same. You haven't aged at all.
Oh, that's funny. I feel like I've aged a lot. I had my lot going on in the background here, but thank you. I really enjoyed the talk days. It was great to
I feel
hear.
like we should have a little 90s reunion and finish and to finish grab some glasses of wine and have a chat.
Yes, yes.
I'm going to shout out Lisa Sigmund, campus director, who's joined us for the evening.
Thank you. And Lorna and Elle, thank you so much
Thank you so
for
much.
helping put this together.
And really, thank you both. You have put a brand new energy into the Alumni Association, the whirlwind of events. Lorna, you've been on the ground everywhere. I mean, I know you're West Indian, so that's where it comes from. You just bring the energy, but I'm really grateful to see that kind of energy behind things and all the events. The two of you have really just really done some beautiful work. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. And for everyone, stay tuned. We've got lots more events coming up. Wherever you are, there's probably going to be one. So I guess there'll be one in Westchester. For those of you who are in Mamaroneck.
Yeah, even if
Definitely have one
you're
of
Also, yes, so we are planning to do more regional events and just to connect and engage everyone. So would love to see you out for events. And if you're in the city, check our website. We are going to be posting the upcoming events for the year. And if it's your reunion year, we're looking forward to a fantastic weekend next year with reunions. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay. See you soon.
See you soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.